So I am making this video because my webcam has finally decided to start working again, and I am currently writing my thesis on a subject that I love to talk about, and it is on spiritual emergence, emergency, and psychosis. And I'm really trying to get at the difference between non-ordinary states that may arise within the uh, context of contemplative practices like meditation, yoga, tai chi, pranayama, psychedelics, and psychedelics are sometimes labeled different than contemplative practices, but I find that there's some crossover in what can arise as a result. Though it's not the same, but that's another video. And I'm writing about this because I have had my own experiences that were really confusing and intense, and it mimicked a lot that I was reading about meditation and spiritual awakening, but then it was also at a level of intensity that was made functioning very hard, and in some ways felt psychotic. And so it got me interested in this particular topic, and specifically because at the end of this experience I had felt deeply transformed. My life felt much richer. It helped me heal through a very deep, painful breakup that I had just gone through. And it really took me from a stoner who had no direction in life and no idea what the hell I was doing to feeling deeply dedicated to the meditation practice that I had been doing, and falling as deeply into that as I could. So I was practicing Vipassana as taught by Shinzen Young at the time, and prior to that I'd been pretty enmeshed in the psychedelic world, more on the explorative, how trippy does it get, what the hell is actually going on here kind of psychedelic stuff, instead of well-intentioned ceremonies. It was more of let's just take this and see where it goes, and I'm really curious about my mind and what is how does this impact reality and stuff. And so the experience started because I had stopped doing psychedelics after I'd broken up with my then girlfriend, and was in a lot of pain and suffering, and everything that I was using drugs to run away from had started coming to the surface, which also happened on trips sometimes, funny enough, but I was never really willing to go there at that point in my life. And so I was doing this practice where I was paying attention to the experience of selfing. So I was noticing the different component parts to it, mental images, mental talk, emotional body sensations, the sense of locality in my experience. I was paying attention to these different strands of sensory experience, as my teacher called it. And as I started paying attention to them, they started no longer feeling like solid, stable things. They started to take on vibratory, undulatory, what she calls flow. And so I started to pay attention to how the self was not this solid, stable thing, but this waving, fluid, different components intermingling and intertwining and collapsing. And in Vipassana they talk about the arising and passing phase of their map. And so basically that's what this was, is his take on arising and passing. And that really broke down my sense of solid, stable self. And as that started to collapse, all the phenomena that I experienced on psychedelics started to open up again. It'd been at least a month and a half or so since I had done psychedelics, I think. I'm pretty sure. It wasn't like I was doing it in that moment, thankfully. And So yeah, all these archetypal imagery, the way life would organize is it started to take on this trip or dreaminess to it, where it felt like there were these underlying forces that were influencing me and those around me, and it would come out in a way that would express a particular myth, and the myth would have a teaching for me. And for instance, like when I was really high one time, not from doing drugs, but it was just like an intense wave of these like sort of more shamanic type elements, um, with intense body imagery, images, or not images, intense body sensations, energies shooting through me. Uh, I was starting to like have these really intense shakes on my cushion that would occasionally, even like a few times, threw me off of the cushion, which is interesting because um, probably shouldn't have been sitting as much as I was at that point. Um, but what else happened? It was really intense to sleep. My dreams became extremely vivid. They would link up with things that were happening in my daily life, and so it was like daily life became more dreamlike, and uh, yeah, it was a really interesting few weeks, and I was having so many synchronicities where it was like my mind and my body was syncing up with everything around me, and I could feel how everything was impacting it seemed like everything was impacting everything else, and so it was like I was entering into this uh, collective consciousness, I guess. I'm going to talk about it as the subtle collective in my thesis is what I'm calling it, which is sort of coming from this Wilberian model. Um, but yeah, so I was opening up to all this different phenomena, and it became very difficult to function. One time, I remember like probably the peak of it happened when it started to feel like these archetypal forces were influencing everything around me and my moods, and so it created this sort of disorientation of what was self and other. And I think that was just like a part of the confusion of that level of development, um, of that sort of transition, which I'll talk about probably more in other videos. Um, but I was talking to my meditation teacher, and I said, it feels like there is a cosmic battle going on in me and in the world. And uh, I was just clearly distraught. And she looked at me, and it felt like it was myself talking to me, not just like my meditation teacher. Um, and she said, Braxton, my teacher spent many years in those realms and says there's nothing of value there. I don't play games with demons or angels. I just pay attention to experience. Uh, what's happening? She said something along the lines of deconstruct your experience. It's made up of mental images, mental talk, sights, sounds, body sensations. Like deconstruct your experience. Don't go out into the realms of power and archetype, is what she said. And so I started crying at this point. It was this really intense, emotional, felt like opening, but it was like this sadness and confusion because I really didn't have any orientation to what was happening and was freaking out. And so we hang up, and I'm walking down the street in Santa Monica, and then I asked the question, "Am I going crazy?" And in that moment, Gnarls Barkley started playing at the cafe I was in front of. And if you don't know the lyrics, you should look that up because it literally was singing the experience I was having to me. And it was just this sense of synchronizing with the rest of the universe and being like a part of it instead of just this separate self that was sort of a victim of the world or was trying to make it in the world. But yeah, it was really intense. And then I went down to the beach and laid down and bought a book called The Untethered Soul, and freaked out a little on the beach, but calmed down. And then as I was walking up, I got to the parking deck, I became very disoriented, and all of the cars that were previously there had pretty much gone. I was parked on the 8th floor, and about 3 floors worth of cars below the 8th floor were totally vacant, and it just was very disorienting. I felt like I was in there for like 20 minutes, and when I got to my car, I had no parking pass anymore, and then was like, okay, I have to pay like $20, and so I get to the gate, and the gate just opens automatically on its own, and I just waited for someone else who had to like pay the fine, and so it was just a really weird experience. And as I'm pulling out, I start to feel myself like get pulled back, and everything just starts visually dissolving in front of me. It's like the world's dissolving, and my sense of orientation's dissolving. Myself is all dissolving into this like light. It's like this cloudy, murky, like very bright light, and I'm driving the car. But it's not even that I'm driving the car. It's that driving is happening all on its own as I'm having this visual experience of the self and world dissolving into this just like vibrant light. But it was a cloudy light. It was very important quality of it. It was like everything was just like, just sort of like arising out of but collapsing into this experience of light. And as that part ended up fading, I came across a sticker that said, "Not of this world." And it was just the way everything was unfolding. It had this quality of synchronicity and like magic, really. But yeah, it was so intense that it was very difficult for me to function. I was very fortunate. I got shingles during it, and so I got called. I couldn't go to work. I was working at Whole Foods, and so I really just sat for 2 weeks and wrote out this experience. I'm sure my roommate was a little concerned. A few people I talked to seemed either they were like really into what I was saying, or they were somewhat concerned. And my meditation teacher had gone on retreat or something. I think her sister had a baby, and so she was uncontactable for after that first conversation when it started happening. Yeah, that was the first experience, which was very dreamy and very, energetic and psychedelic in a way. And all the other two openings I had were too, but they had different qualities, which I'll get into. And then maybe I'll unpack all of it in the way I'm going to talk about it in my thesis. And I'm laying it out in a developmental model, because there were these really intense, subtle experiences of energies, archetypes, and stuff like that, and like a sense of dissolving, and it was a very like explosive and content-oriented experience. And then the last one I had, at least that I would frame as an emergency, was had a voidness to it, a non-existence, like this sort of like nothing quality that was just very potent and intense. And that was the most destabilizing of all of them, was the third one. And it was that quality that made it so difficult, because it had all the shamanic imagery too. But that, I don't want to go too into that now. I think I'm going to do a video for each one, and I'll end this first one with that. So that was my experience of spiritual emergency. And yeah, I really hope that this might make some people who are having this kind of experience not feel so alone. So I wish all of you well. And yeah, if you have anything to say on the topic of spiritual emergency, emergence, and psychosis, let me know.